Well, welcome everybody. My name is Helen Prosser and I'm one of the founders of Brilliant Beginnings and a director of fertility law firm NGA Law. And I'm just very excited to be here to introduce a couple of phenomenal speakers today, where we are going to be focusing on how surrogacy can work for solo parents in the US. NGA Law and Brilliant Beginnings have worked with our clients going to the US to really enable surrogacy to happen more seamlessly and to help everyone navigate through the highs, lows, and general complexities of navigating through a journey from the UK for people going to the US. I'm very excited to introduce you to Simon Burrell. And Simon has kindly agreed to come and chat to us today about his experience of having a lovely little boy, William, through a wonderful surrogate in California. Simon's also very happy to take questions, and if you do have questions, then just pop them in the chat box, and we'll make a point of gathering them all together before we sign off later today. But first and foremost, I want to reintroduce you to Natalie Gamble, my business partner and very long-standing friend, who is going to just kind of outline some of the legal aspects for surrogacy in the US, as well as the implications of how you might bring your child back. And then we'll move on to Simon and his great story. Natalie.
Super, thank you very much, Helen. And we thought it would be helpful to kind of kick off with the legal issues because they are such a big part of a surrogacy journey when you're crossing borders, and particularly for single parents because the law has evolved so much over the last few years, and it often feels like a kind of very complicated part of the process. So I'm going to take you through how it works if you are a parent from the UK looking to go to the US for surrogacy, so how the systems of law between the US and the UK fit together. I'm going to talk about how the law has evolved for single parents over the last few years and what that means in practice. And I'm going to talk you through kind of the process and how it works in two different scenarios. So firstly, in the scenario where you're conceiving with your own eggs or sperm and you're your child's biological parent, but also in the scenario where you're conceiving and you're not your child's biological parent, which for lots of single parents, particularly single mums, can be a very common issue. And then finally, I'm going to talk about some of the travel and logistics issues that we've been dealing with in terms of kind of finding solutions to some of the additional legal problems that have cropped up as a result of COVID in the last few years, just to give you some kind of up-to-date guidance on all of how that is working. So to start from the very beginning, I guess, one of the big reasons that parents from the UK choose to go to the US for surrogacy is to access the more supportive and permissive legal framework that exists in America for surrogacy. So if you are conceiving with a surrogate based in the US, there will be a legal structure around the arrangement that you enter into. So typically, having instructed your agency, found your surrogate, found your clinic to create embryos, your next step will be about putting the legal framework in place in the US, and you will have an attorney who will help you put in place an agreement with your surrogate. And that agreement records everybody's intentions that the child who the surrogate is carrying is not the child of the surrogate, but is the child of the intended parent. So you will have that in writing, and in the US that will be recognized. So the kind of specifics of the process you go through in America in order to ratify that agreement will vary depending on the state in which your surrogate lives. And in some states there will be a pre-birth court process, for example in California where Simon went, and he'll talk to you about that, I'm sure. In other states it works slightly differently with an administrative process or a post-birth court process. But the end result is that that agreement, if you like, is rubber stamped in terms of saying that it is valid, And that then enables you to be registered on your child's birth certificate in America as the only legal parent. Now, in America, you can do that if you are a single father, you can do that if you are a single mother. It doesn't matter whether you are the biological parent or not, because in the US, parenthood is all about what everybody intends. So one of the big draws for parents going to the US is that kind of structure, if you like, around the arrangement that you're entering into. Everybody's clear about where everybody stands, and that's reflected in the law. For parents from the UK, though, the flip side is that that is not automatically recognised in the UK. So for UK law purposes, irrespective of what the birth certificate says in the States, your surrogate who gives birth will be treated as your child's legal mother. And if she's married, then her husband or wife will be the other legal parent. So what that means from a UK perspective is, while everything is kind of sorted in the US, as far as the UK is concerned, things remain unresolved. So if you are a father, you may be the legal father for UK law purposes if your surrogate is not married. If she is married, you won't be the legal father. But in any event, you won't have the full status you need to make parenting decisions in the UK, and your surrogate will remain the legal mother and the person who has that parental responsibility to make decisions here. So you're in that unresolved position. If you're a single mother, then because the surrogate is treated as the mother, as the woman who gives birth, then even if you are the biological mother, you won't be treated as a legal parent in the UK. So regardless of kind of whether you're a mum or a dad, your situation as far as UK law is concerned is not resolved as soon as your child is born. So there is a process that you will need to go through on the UK side to unpick that. And in practical terms, that is around bringing your child back to the UK and then making a court application of some kind to become the legal parent here, and to make sure that your surrogate doesn't have any residual responsibilities. So for most British parents who go through surrogacy, the way of doing that is to make an application for a parental order. And the parental order is a court order that was specifically designed for surrogacy cases. It takes away the status of the surrogate who gives birth, and it transfers parenthood fully and permanently to the intended parents. And at the end of the process, you are granted a birth certificate, a British birth certificate, which confirms that. Now, one of the reasons that the law is more complicated for single parents, or has historically been more complicated for single parents, is that for many years, single parents were excluded from that process. So if you're looking at kind of information on the internet that might be a bit older, you may see that, you know, you're not eligible for that order. So I just kind of wanted to kind of clarify how the law had evolved and kind of where we are at the moment. So to kind of go back in time and tell you the history of this, when parental orders were first created, and this goes back to the mid-1990s, in order to apply for a parental order, you had to be a heterosexual married couple. They were the only types of intended parents that could apply. The law was expanded in 2008 to include other sets of parents. So from 2010, when that law change came into effect, same-sex couples were able to apply, and also unmarried couples, but single parents remained excluded. So you had to be a couple to apply for a parental order. Now, when that law was going through Parliament in 2008, we were involved in some of the lobbying and raising issues around that. And we put on the table the fact that this would exclude single parents, and that seemed really unfair. And at the time, the government position was that that's what they intended. They felt, as they said, that surrogacy was such an serious undertaking that it was better suited to a couple. Frankly, quite ridiculous, but this is what they said at the time. So single parents were excluded. Now, we worked with quite a few single parents, mainly single dads, who were going to the US for surrogacy, and ending up in this situation where they didn't really have a solution to kind of resolve the legal issues. And we could feel kind of how unfair that was and how discriminatory the law was. So in 2015, we took a case where we represented a single father who had a little boy through surrogacy in the States. And with his help, we challenged the law in order to get a ruling from the High Court to say that the law was discriminating, that it was unfair, and that it was breaching human rights legislation. We had the government on the other side of that case, but they kind of conceded at the last minute, and so they agreed that they would change the law. So that resulted in a process that went through Parliament to change the law, to add in a new part to the law which caters specifically for single parents. And that new law came into force in January 2019. So from that point in time, 3 years ago, single parents have been able to apply for parental orders in the same way as couples. Now, that is obviously great news in terms of, being inclusive and making sure that we're kind of representing and including all different sorts of families. But it's worth stressing that one of the other criteria for parental orders is that at least one of the intended parents, if it's a couple, or the intended parent, if it's a single parent, has to be the biological parent of the child. Now, for many single dads who are conceiving their own biological children, that's quite straightforward. It means that they are now in the same kind of category, if you like, as other parents with being able to apply for a parental order. But for many single mums, if there are difficulties with them being able to carry a pregnancy themselves, quite often they need the help of an egg donor as well. And in those situations, they will not be eligible for the parental order.
Oh, I think we've lost Natalie for now, but hopefully she'll be able to reconnect. So I wonder whether Simon, if you can still hear us. Oh,
yeah,
you're there. Wonderful. Maybe let's move on to your story, if that's okay, and we'll regroup with Natalie when she comes back in. So for everybody, I'm delighted to introduce you to Simon Burrell, who has kindly agreed to chat with us about his story, creating his family in the US. Thanks, Simon.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I thought I'd give you a kind of potted version of my story of going on a surrogacy journey in California, which culminated in the birth of my little boy at the end of 2019. Yeah, I'll try and keep it short so that I don't drone on forever. But yeah, please feel free to ask questions later if there's anything that you think you want a bit more information about. But I thought I'd start off with a little bit about how I ended up using surrogacy. I first remember feeling paternal, like thinking about having a kid of my own when I was in my late teens, actually. But then when I realized that I was gay, I just kind of thought, right, well, it's not going to happen for me, because in those days, we're talking early 90s, I'd never heard of surrogacy. Adoption wasn't an option. So I just put it to the back of my mind. In the mid 90s, a couple of gay guys who were with each other in a partnership did use overseas surrogacy. And I remember it was a bit of a media storm and it was very unfavorable. And in the end, they fled the country before social services intervened to take their children, because the approach of social services in those days was gay men are not considered fit parents by us. So again, I took that as a bit of a kind of blow that, okay, here's this kind of little possibility of surrogacy, but it's not going to happen in this country. And then when it became a possibility, I kind of hoped that it would happen more organically, that I would co-parent with someone, we'd be in a relationship, it would work out, we'd both want a child and whatever. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. And so I was approaching 50 and I thought, right, I really need to get on with this if I'm going to do it. I wasn't sure about adoption and I thought it might take years as well. So I thought surrogacy, and I did some online research and found out about Brilliant Beginnings and thought they look really good, so I'll get in touch. And they were really, really helpful right from the get-go, and so supportive all the way through the process. So helpful. And they put me in, well, they suggested 3 different sets of clinics, surrogacy agencies in the States, and attorneys that they knew worked together. And I talked with Stephen, the guy who sort of manages the US surrogacies, and he was really helpful in being able to talk me through the choice and fit me with the team that he thought I would most find it easy to work with, which proved to be the case. So I was put in touch with West Coast Surrogacy in Southern California. And the involvement of Brilliant Beginnings doesn't end there, because they kind of held my hand, for want of a better word, but that's what it felt like all the way through the process. So they were always there to kind of check in with, even though I'd gone to California, so to speak, hadn't physically gone at that point, but was using a surrogacy agency over there. And one of the great advantages of going on the surrogacy journey in the States, and particularly California, as Natalie mentioned, is that it's so well established there, and it's such a smooth process. They've been doing it for years. It's so well regulated and supported. And so, yeah, looking back, it was such an easy journey, although, you know, it didn't always seem so at the time because I had so much personally and emotionally invested in it. But if you choose the right combination of agency, attorney, and fertility clinic, that makes a huge difference, because it does take so much of the kind of worry, stress, and pain out of the process. So I went out to the fertility clinic and did what I had to do in terms of my donation. And then I chose an egg donor. And so the embryos were created. And then in the meantime, West Coast Surrogacy sent me some profiles, they call them, but that sort of makes them sound a bit kind of brief, and you know, you think of the kind of profiles that you see in online dating and so on, but you know, this was masses and masses of information about these surrogates, their medical history, their own personal histories, statements about why they wanted to be a surrogate, and so on, which gave you a really good idea of who these people were. The first couple I was sent, I don't know, for me, I didn't kind of feel too enthusiastic, although I couldn't necessarily verbalize why that was. But then the third one they sent me, there was just something about it that's really stood out for me and made me think I'd really like to investigate this a bit further. So the case manager at West Coast Surrogacy then set up a telephone interview, really, or a telephone conference, whatever you want to call it, between us. So it was me at one end of the phone, so to speak, and Patricia, who ended up being my surrogate, and her partner on the other end. And Debbie, the case manager, had, you know, she'd done this so many times that she had a very clear structure for what we should talk about and discuss with each other, which was great. You know, it meant that we covered all the things that we might want to think about or that would be relevant going forwards. And at the end of it, Debbie said, okay, well, I'll give you guys a couple of days to think about how you feel and check in with you. But when the call finished, I just thought, well, I don't need a couple of days. I just feel, you know, just felt so positive about that particular potential surrogate. And Debbie then rang me and said, you know, how did you feel that went? And I said, oh, great. And I don't need a couple of days. And she said, well, that's really interesting because I've just had the same conversation with them. And so we were matched. And as Natalie mentioned, then the attorneys start working on the agreement between us. And that was, again, it kind of happened. I received all the information I needed and all the advice, and that went through fine. And also Brilliant Beginnings and Natalie also provide some insight. You know, you send them the paperwork too, so they can check that there's nothing from the UK angle that's going to be problematic later on. So again, all the bases are kind of covered. And once the agreement's in place, then the attorney sends a kind of legal letter, some kind of clearance to the clinic, so that they know that they can start working with Patricia, the surrogate. And then it again, it's all kind of taken care of. And you know, you're told in advance what will happen at this point, and then that takes place. So the clinic work with the surrogate to make sure that she's ready to go through the transfer process. And that was, I guess, at that point the most challenging bit emotionally, because when you go through these transfer processes where they transfer the embryo into the surrogate in the clinic, you know, it's high stakes, because you're really hoping that this is going to take and be successful. And I'd been warned that often it doesn't happen the first time, that it can be the second or third occasion. And in my case, it was the second occasion. So the first time it was disappointing. I have to say, you just can't help but not be, take it sort of badly emotionally, because, you know, you really, really want there to be a pregnancy. But, you know, again, there was lots of help, lots of support. And so then there's the second transfer, and that was successful. And so there was a pregnancy, which was, you know, fantastic from my point of view. Strange when it's happening on the other side of the world. Well, not quite the other side of the world, but, you know, I don't know what it is, 10,000 miles away or so. But the case manager at West Coast and Patricia, the surrogate, were really, really good at keeping me in the loop with all of the appointments, the visits, the scans. Patricia and I kept in touch all the way through, and we're still in touch on social media, because that was easier somehow. There was an 8-hour time difference, so it was harder to kind of find times when we could actually speak on the phone in real time. But, you know, we'd really hit it off. So that was a nice relationship that kind of underpinned what was going on and made me feel, you know, that I had nothing to worry about, really. You know, one of the things about the American healthcare system is, okay, it's not equal in terms of access, and you have to pay for it, but it is really, really high quality. And so, you know, I would see the really high quality videos of scans and things like this. So it all made me feel that I was part of it, even though I was quite a long way away. And Stephen was on hand to chat if ever I felt I wanted to talk to somebody. That was really handy. There was also a counsellor that was involved that the agency had got on board, because under the rules that apply in America, it's mandatory for the surrogate to check in with the counsellor. I can't remember how frequently it is now, but it was fairly frequently, which I think is good. It was optional for me, but I chose to do it because the counsellor was so fantastic. She was one of those people where even if you didn't think you had any worries or any reason to talk with her, it was just great to check in with her, because she would, I would come away from those sessions, as I say, even if I didn't feel I had any kind of stresses or anxieties, feeling like amazingly positive and so on about the whole process. So that was really handy through the pregnancy. It was only really towards the end that things became a bit more problematic, and that wasn't because of anybody's action or fault or anything like that. It was just that William ended up coming earlier than had been expected. So he was due on the 10th of January. And because he was a very big baby, so Patricia had gotten quite enormous by the end. And so they decided that they would induce on the 3rd if he hadn't been born already. So I arranged to fly out on the 28th of December so I could settle in and be there in time for the 3rd or 10th of January. And then William decided he was going to be born on Boxing Day. So I woke up on Boxing Day morning to these messages, voicemail messages saying, Simon, you need to get here now because Patricia's gone into labor. So it was great news that it was happening in a way, but challenging because there was I here in the UK. So I had one of those journeys that was a bit like out of a movie, Trains, Planes and Automobiles, I think is one that springs to mind, where I just suddenly had to drop everything and get myself to California as quickly as I could. But the airline was very helpful, and I got out there the next day and drove to the hospital, and there was William. It was an incredible moment. It makes me feel a bit emotional now to talk about it, but the odd thing was that when I actually got there, and there he was in this little room being looked after by a nurse, I didn't have a chance to be emotional because this kind of parenting just kicked in. One of the things before I went on this journey, you know, I wondered, I guess anyone does who hasn't had a child before, you know, I really think I want to do this. I believe I want to do this, but will I be able to? And yeah, the strange thing was that the second I was presented with him, it was like this kind of parenting instinct just clicked in, almost like a sort of instant download of extra software. And so I didn't have time to be emotional at that point. I just was straight into being a dad. And the hospital were really supportive, you know, that I kind of got a crash course from the nurses in how to parent. And I was in that room in the hospital with William for a couple of days while they were kind of teaching me how to do it all. And Patricia was in a room just around the corner, actually, because they'd kept her in for a couple of days because she'd lost some blood during the pregnancy. Nothing that they were particularly worried about, but they, you know, just for observation, she was there. So that was great having her around the corner. She was able to visit. It kind of confirmed what I'd felt from the initial telephone conversation, you know, that where it had felt right, and the relationship that had developed where we were keeping in touch on social media, that when she first came into the room, it was like she was an old friend that I knew already, you know, it was kind of this bond that was there. And we were then in the States we were in Palm Springs for 5 weeks, because Natalie will probably say a bit more about this, but the quickest way to get back to the UK is to get the child's American passport that they're entitled to. So it takes 3 weeks for that birth certificate to come through, and then it was quite easy to get the passport, and then we flew back. But during that 5-week period, we saw quite a bit of Patricia, and that was great. It was just a lovely time, where it was kind of a time outside the ordinary reality of when you're back in the UK, to just really bond and to get used to being a dad. Stephen had advised me of the things that I would need to make sure I had in the place I was staying. So that was really helpful. And yeah, so it was just a really lovely time. Once William was born, Natalie and her team started the process of applying for the parental order. And again, I just felt super supported the whole way through. I used to be a lawyer myself, and so I had wondered whether it was the process of applying for the parental order was something where I could do more of it myself. But you know, once William came, I thought that's not realistic. You need as much support as you can get. And Natalie and her team did a great job of doing that. Part of the process involves that the court appoints a social worker who meets you and reports to the court on you. And she mentioned to me that she hadn't been involved in a case that had been so well prepared. So, you know, just to give you an idea of how well supported I'd been through that process by Natalie and her team. And then, yeah, in the meantime, we came back to the UK, flew back from the States, and yeah, found myself back here in Brighton, where we live. You know, had to organise childcare eventually. William goes to a day nursery a certain number of times a week, because once my parental leave was over, obviously I needed to go back to work. I went back 4 days a week, which I'm still doing. And it's great. You know, I mean, it has its challenges, especially because my little one is now 2. So you've got the so-called terrible twos, which are challenging, but they're challenges which I'm so glad and, you know, so thankful that I have. So I've no regrets at all. In hindsight, the only thing I would have done differently would have been not to spend so much time navel gazing and second guessing myself beforehand. Obviously, you need to be clear that you're going to be able to do it. You know, that you're going to get a certain amount of parental leave, or if not, you're going to have support from friends or family or somebody. And you need to work out that you'll be able to afford childcare, because it's not cheap. But, you know, if you've done all that, if you think you can do it and you think you want to do it, then go for it, and don't spend a lot of time sort of worrying about, oh, what's it going to be like and so on. Because it's actually easier than I expected it would be. People told me, oh, you're going to be a single parent, that's really brave. Yeah, of course it's work, but an effort compared to being a single person with no kids. But yeah, it's less challenging than I thought it would be, and people are way more accepting. You know, I mean, no other parents at the nursery have ever given me any kind of, I've never felt that I'm being treated any differently whatsoever because I've got that I'm a single parent. Some of them ask me about William's background when they've got to know me, and when I talk about the fact that I used a surrogate, they're interested, they're intrigued. There's no kind of like, oh, there's no judgment or anything like that. So if that's something that worries you, don't let it. And so yeah, I had a journey which I'm so glad I went on, and it resulted in William. So there we are. Sorry, I've gone on a bit.
No, fantastic, Simon. That's fantastic. That's so helpful. And it's always, I know I've heard your story before, but it's always so lovely to kind of just feel how your life has changed, but also the reassurance that, you're offering in terms of it being not without its emotional lows, but that it hindsight just makes you feel it was smooth and yeah, wonderful. We have a few questions, but I want to loop back Natalie. So
Sure.
Simon, if you're able to stick around, we'll come back to some questions. And I'm hoping Natalie is back again. Yes, there she is. Thank you.
See and hear me.
Yeah, and I think Natalie, you were just at the stage where we were looking a bit of around the history of the way the law has changed and evolved.
Yes, and yeah, apologies for the interruption, but I think I was talking about how we now have these kind of two paths depending on whether you have a biological connection or not. So if you are the biological parent of your child, then in the way that Simon has described, you're now kind of within the system that was designed for surrogacy. So typically the way that it will work is that you go to the US, you deal with the legal process in the US in a very upfront way, in the way that I've described. And then when your child is born, the first kind of hurdle you'll need to deal with, if you like, is bringing your baby back to the UK. Now, most of the parents who go to the US for surrogacy, as Simon has explained, will apply for an American passport for their child, because typically that process is quick and straightforward. And it's possible for US citizens to enter the UK without any kind of visa. So there is sometimes a bit of discussion to be had at the border that we can support you with in terms of explaining what the legal context is. But what you would then do is bring the baby back and then apply for your parental order. The parental order application in an international surrogacy case will be dealt with by one of a very small number of High Court judges who deal with a lot of these cases and are very experienced. And there is quite a lot of information that you need to provide to show that you meet all the various criteria. There's also, as part of the process, a quite light touch welfare assessment, where a social worker will come and do one visit with you at home and have a chat with you over a cup of tea, and then do some background checks and prepare a report for the court. But it's quite contained as a process, the parental order. So you'll have one or possibly two hearings before a High Court judge. And at the end of the process, the court will make an order. That order will also get sent to the General Register Office that will then issue your child with a British birth certificate that confirms you are the only parent. Now, typically, it slightly depends on how you manage that process, but if we are representing you and kind of managing that process very proactively, you're looking at about 4 to 6 months to get through to that final hearing stage at which your legal parenthood will be resolved. So that's very well tested. There are, I think, about 90 parental order applications going through the court each year, which deal with US surrogacy. So the courts are used to dealing with US cases, and it's now a very well-trodden path. And if you're going through the surrogacy process with the help of Brilliant Beginnings on their US pathway, then help from NGA law is kind of integrated into that pathway at every step. So you'll have legal advice from us at the beginning, we'll review your documents, we'll help you with your wills, we'll help you plan for the birth, we'll help you deal with the travel, and we'll represent you in your parental order application. So it's all just kind of part of the process. The other scenario is the scenario that's a slightly more complicated one, which is where you are conceiving without having a biological connection with your child. And usually that's the one for single parents that we see affecting single mums more than single dads, but it could apply for either of you. And if you don't have a biological connection with your child, unfortunately, that means that you won't be eligible for the parental order. Because one of the other requirements for the parental order is that you do have that biological connection as a parent. So in the past, we have advised other kind of non-biological parents, but The process for resolving things was always quite uncertain because it hadn't been tested. But I'm very pleased to tell you all that we have just finished dealing with the very first case involving a single mum who went to the US for surrogacy and conceived with donor eggs. And she has effectively tested the process in terms of kind of how it works. So we can now be much more confident about what the steps are and how it plays out in practice. So if you are conceiving without a biological connection, then what we're doing here is kind of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, in the sense that we're using law that was designed for other purposes in order to kind of wrap up all the issues and resolve the legal issues. So the first legal issue that we will have a difficulty with is around nationality. So the fact that your surrogate will be treated as the legal mother and you're not a biological legal parent for UK law purposes means that your child won't be a British citizen even if you are British. And so the first thing that you'll need to do is make an application to the Home Office to ask for them to register your child as a British citizen. Now, the Home Office has this discretionary power to grant British nationality, but they have a policy for surrogacy cases which kind of sets out the people that will fall within that policy. And we've done quite a lot of these applications for non-biological parents in various different situations. So it's a process that's well tested. It takes a while, but it is something that's quite reliable now. So in practical terms, as I described, for parents who have a biological connection, you can get the US passport to bring your baby home, but alongside that you need to be making this British nationality application as quickly as you can so that your child has a secure right to be here in the UK. So that deals with the nationality side. We also then have the issue of dealing with your parentage, because even if your child becomes British, that doesn't make you their parent. So the way of resolving that is to make an application for adoption to the UK court. And this is the bit where previously there was quite a lot of uncertainty, because we didn't know quite what the process would involve in these quite unusual circumstances. We didn't quite know how the court would react to the commercial elements that are involved, the international elements that are involved, and quite how the court would feel about parents who kind of fall outside the box of parental orders then using this other solution. But having now been through the process, I can say that most of those issues are not significant problems. So the way the process works is that you need to make an initial application to the High Court for permission to bring your application, because otherwise you have to live with your child for 3 years before you can apply. And that initial court process will set the path going forwards. So once you've done that and you've got the court's permission to make the application, you then have to work with your local authority, who will carry out an assessment of whether the adoption is in your child's best interests. Now, that is a lighter touch assessment process than it would be if you were applying to adopt a child who was completely unrelated to you. So if you were being matched with the child through social services, for example, for adoption, it's a different process to that. But it is more onerous than the welfare assessment that's done in a parental order application. So rather than having one home visit, it will be a series of home visits over a period of time with a social worker who will prepare quite a detailed report. But again, it's nothing to be too afraid of, and we can certainly help you manage that. Once that assessment process is complete, you can then make your application to the court for the adoption order. And then there's a process to follow. Ideally, you'll go back to the same judge. There's some documents that we need for the surrogate to sign and so on. But that court process then will complete the adoption so that you will be granted an adoption order, which will make you your child's parent here in the UK. And a bit like with the parental order, when the final adoption is granted, a copy gets sent to the General Register Office, and they will issue your child with an adoption certificate, which is like your child's identification document, if you like, as well as confirming your parentage. So this process will get you to the same end result as if you go through a parental order. It does take longer, so we're looking at kind of north of a year to go through the process. And obviously it's a little bit more clunky because we've got to do the nationality application as well as the adoption, because of the timing that's involved. But we do know now that it is navigable, it works. We're about to have the case that we've dealt with on this published, which means there will be a reported case as a precedent to refer to. So it's really good news for single parents who aren't able to conceive with their own eggs and sperm. So that's the kind of the legal process and how it works. I was also just going to say a few words about some of the travel issues, because I know this is something that's caused a lot of anxiety for people over the last few years. And obviously because of COVID, we have been kind of faced with lots of challenges in this area that we haven't seen before. So a travel restriction that prevented people traveling into the US. We saw closures of the US passport office, which made it more complicated to get passports for babies. and all sorts of kind of issues around that. So I guess one of the things our team has been working really hard on in the last couple of years is solving these problems for parents who were already in the process. So it means that now we do have all these solutions in place. So while we are seeing these restrictions lifted, so now you can travel to the US again, there's no restriction on travel. We do have the confidence that if anything changes and things go backwards, those solutions are already there and in place. So in terms of getting into the US government was giving travel exemptions to parents in order to get there for birth. So we didn't have any clients who had to miss the birth of their child because of travel restrictions. So that's good news. In terms of getting passports to get the babies home, when it became difficult and long-winded to get a US passport, the UK government stepped in with an emergency passport process for British citizen children of parents through surrogacy, and they dealt with those on an emergency basis. So although they're not needed at the moment, that system is now established. And for example, we're seeing at the moment with Ukraine, that has been re-implemented to rescue surrogacy babies very quickly. So we know that it's that kind of backup, if you like, for the government. And lastly, in terms of the mechanics of conception, obviously we had parents who were facing difficulties with getting out to the US to leave their sperm or go through their IVF cycle. But we work with the HFEA, who have updated their guidance to make it clear that it is possible and perfectly legal for sperm or embryos to be shipped from the UK abroad for the purposes of surrogacy. So you now either have the option of depositing your sperm at a clinic here in the UK and shipping it overseas, or now you are able to travel to the US, you can go there and leave it there. So there's lots of options and lots of solutions in some ways that have arisen as a result of COVID, which are good backups for the future. So that was all of what I was going to cover on the UK legal side. I guess the summary is really just that things have evolved. So if you're kind of reading lots of stuff on the internet, just make sure that the information that you're looking at is up to date. And that for any of you who are parents looking at doing this now, you're not the first to have done this. Other people have trodden this path and have kind of made the ways of doing it much clearer. So it's much easier to do now than it was kind of 5 or 10 years ago. And we're, certainly very happy to help guide you on what you need to do. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thanks, Natalie. Thank you. We do have actually a couple of questions that were emailed in earlier, which I just want to touch on. And one of them is, well, we've had a few questions around the cost and budgeting and expenses. And I just thought it might be helpful to kind of give a perspective from, the experience that we have, as well as Simon and Natalie, would obviously really welcome any input that you have. But essentially around budgeting for the US, and what we have seen over the years, that a sensible budget is anywhere between 160,000, could go all the way up to, more than 220, 230,000, if you were looking to conceive twins, or if you had a particularly complicated journey. What we've seen is that as a really healthy budget, because I know those parameters are quite broad, is to be thinking around 160 to 170,000. We've seen costs go up during the pandemic, and that is generally around the shortage, the reduction in the number of surrogates, and so then sometimes the costs around all of that have gone up. But as part of our pathway, what we want to make sure is that everybody has all of the parameters and variables that are going to relate to them, and how that is going to impact costs right at the outset, so that you can budget, and you're budgeting for the various aspects of the costs along the way. So, initial sign up will be with your agency, and then creating embryos. And that could be with an egg donor, or with your own embryos, if that's something that you've already got. It may be that you'll need to create embryos in the US, so you'd need to build in an amount of travel to get there. You'd also need to then consider the costs of your escrow account once you are matched with the surrogate, and what her expenses and compensation are going to be. And your agency will be able to help you with that. And then the next real phase is once your surrogate starts treatment and gets, you're starting the med cycle. Sorry, I've skipped a step because you'll obviously also have your US legal, and that will be setting up contracts with egg donor, sperm donor, or and your surrogate. And then you'll move through the process. You'll have to be thinking about your surrogate's health insurance. You'll also have to be thinking about your own newborn insurance. So there's a number, and then after your baby is born, travel and accommodation, getting there, and then coming home again, staying in the US for a period of time, and then obviously your UK legal. So there are various stages that you'll be able to budget for, but what we would always typically say is you need to really budget for 60 to 70% of your full budget at the outset to just get you started. And Simon or Natalie, I don't know whether you have anything to add to that.
No, really, just from my experience, yeah, Stephen gave me that budget when I started off, and in the end it came in bang on, actually, pretty much.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Well, the team, I guess, are very comfortable with, talking through the various scenarios and giving you hopefully the information that you need in order to make the decisions that are going to work for you. And to a certain extent, things have changed during COVID because maybe the number of visits haven't been quite as many as we would have seen pre-COVID, spending time with your surrogate and being there, as, Simon, you were saying, for the particular appointment, so that. But the reality is, I think, people are very comfortable with doing everything remotely and virtually, and the communication can happen just as smoothly. So again, tailoring it to the budget that you're comfortable with, so long as you've budgeted for a bit of fat for if and when things, don't go to plan, and that you can rejig things along there. But again, very important for us that you feel you've got all of the information at the outset and you can budget, and that's very much alongside of all of our pathway as well. Yeah. Natalie, was there anything else you wanted to add in terms of costs? No.
No, that's fine.
No. Okay. So the other question is around timescales. How long does this all take? If I push the go button today, when am I going to be coming back to the UK with my baby? And of course, that very much depends on, how many transfers, how well your surrogate sort of responds to the treatment, how quickly you get matched with the surrogate, and all of the sort of just day-to-day life that goes on in amongst things, and how quickly you can get through things. We have seen a shift in terms of the matching times for the US, but that's really, I think, as a result of COVID and things like just the world going at a very different pace. So the average times that we're seeing at the moment is between 7 and 12 months for a match. We are expecting that to come back to the sort of normalized of between 3 and 6 months. But I think there's also a little bit of a backlog where people have been thinking about surrogacy and wanting to have a baby, not quite pushing the go button, now coming to the front, pushing the go button. Plus we've got, surrogates who are still juggling, children going back to school, coming back, and all of the logistics of life becoming normalized in whatever that might look like. We recently did a sort of an average of the clients that we've supported over the years. And the average from the point of somebody saying go to us and, us setting up some time to talk through the mechanics of it and getting going, to bringing the baby home has been an average of 16 months. which is super fast, I think. But I think it again, what we're able to do is get the right agency, clinic, and attorney, you know, within grasp, and to be able to enable people to sort of proactively make the decisions that they're going to need to make, that then mean later on you're not having to stop and think about things. I do think it's sensible to think about this in the terms of 2 years still, because you might not be able to kind of access things in a way that 16 months becomes a reality. So thinking about it over 2 years is probably wise. And Simon, it would be great to hear about, you know, your timescales. You know,
yeah, I think with the circumstances that existed back then, I think I was advised, you know, it would be roughly 2 years from pressing the go button to coming back. And I think that was very accurate, because in the end it was a bit longer, but that was because of certain choices I made about the donation cycles, and also it was to do with the fact that there was a delay, between a longer than usual delay between the first and the second transfers, because one of the levels of, I forget all the medical jargon, but one of the things that they test for before it's an optimal transfer date became a bit problematic, and they had to wait a little bit longer. But you know, so you can never be completely sure because of things like that can just come into the mix. But I think 2 years was a very accurate forecast.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you always hope it's going to be a little bit quicker than that, but actually it gives you the time to prepare for.
Yeah, and of course I didn't go with the first surrogate that they put my way either, you know, so that was my choice, that things were a bit delayed. But I, you know, I don't regret doing that, because it's, you know, it's better to feel comfortable.
Yeah,
very positive.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing to say in terms of timescales is we haven't really seen an impact as to whether it takes longer or it's quicker for solo parents, for single dads or single mums. I think the accessibility in the US you know, is exactly the same across the board. And in fact, I think what we have found is that, you know, for a lot of surrogates, they're super excited to be working with a solo parent, just because actually they know that mechanics of that is going to be a lot more complicated. So it kind of adds a little bit more to the to what draws a surrogate to wanting to work with you. And the final question that I had was around, you know, whether you talked a little bit about this before, Stephen, about Simon, about your you know, you're even thinking about becoming a father, you know, as a solo parent, and in terms of sort of the friends and family support that you had, how much you relied on all of that, but also just in helping you make the decisions about, oh, you know, is your child going to have a normal childhood because you're a solo parent making that decision?
Yeah, I mean, I was worried about that kind of thing, I suppose. But I think one of the things that's been a real revelation to me is you know, how much we have advanced as a society since 20 years ago. So, you know, my sort of worries about, oh, what will people say, and what will they think, and how will William be treated by other kids and their parents and all that kind of thing, I think was very much based on the UK as it was back in the day. Because yeah, most people have been, well, I say most people, everyone, I can't think of an example where I felt, oh, that was a bit unkind, or I wonder why that person's giving me the cold shoulder. That hasn't happened at all. So I think I worried about that unduly. But then, having said that, I did choose to live in Brighton, which is, you know, a particularly inclusive area. So, you know, that may be something to think about if you've got any concerns about these kind of issues. But my experience has been very positive. That people are very willing to help, to offer advice, to offer their time. I mean, I moved house just before William came along. But, you know, my neighbors on both sides said, as soon as they saw that I had a newborn, anything we can do to help, just ask. Likewise, you know, other neighbors across the street. So, you know, it's really uplifting that we're that kind of society now, rather than, you know, in the old days it was, oh, you're using surrogacy, oh dear, you know. Attitudes have changed.
Yeah, I know. I think it is. I think babies just draw people together in ways that you can't imagine. And I think, yeah, the old days are thankfully in the past. So,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, wonderful. Well, I don't have any other questions, so very, very happy. Obviously, this is recorded and we'll be putting it out to everybody who signed in. If there are any other questions or queries, then Natalie, Simon and I are certainly very happy to answer them. And do please get in touch with us either at hello@brilliantbeginnings.co.uk or hello@ngalaw.co.uk, and we'll very happy to answer any questions. There's lots of information on both of our websites that just kind of outline all the things that you need to think about in terms of surrogacy in the US, as well as the practicalities and how to budget, and all of our pathways as well, including our costs. But, you know, really, really appreciate this last hour. Simon, very grateful as always for your time and your wonderful confidence. And we're sorry William's not here to join us, but hopefully at another time. And Natalie, thank you again for joining us from the New Forest. Yeah, thank you.